Okay, let's get started. So, I've been struggling a bit this year. Now, a lot of you are immediately concerned that I'm going to have some kind of panic attack or start talking about how my life is falling apart. But I thought it'd be good, it's best to be a little bit honest. I've been struggling a bit this year because compared to my already quite low standards of productivity, I feel like in this year I've had a bit of a malaise. I haven't been getting a lot of things done. And against this background, a client of mine said, I want you to come and do a talk for my company on the subject of play and enjoyment. And I had had no ideas for about 6 months at this point, so I thought, sure, let's do that. And this is kind of the result. And along the way, I've hopefully unlocked a few maybe of my own clues to understand why is it that I'm in a bit of a funk creatively at the moment. And so this is what I'm going to be sharing with you. I would also say that the event I got asked to speak at was great. It was, my main motivation in that sense was this talk was being held at a coastal resort in Croatia. Now that does motivate you, and this talk is largely about motivation. Although I started off talking about fun, is a sense of fun in the workplace essential? Is it fundamental? This talk is as much, if not more, about what it is that motivates ourselves. We're talking here about the context of fun and play in the context of work. I'm not going to be talking any broader than that or making broader statements about what you should do in your own personal lives. We're talking about fun and play in a work context. And when I think about this, we're talking about creating spaces for enjoyable, safe experimentation. Fun and play are not fun or play if they are not enjoyable. They also need to be safe. To an extent, if these things stop becoming safe, they may no longer be enjoyable as well. And largely speaking, especially in the workplace, when we think about fun and play, it is also a little bit about experimentation. So we're going to be talking a lot about different forms of fun and play in the context of work. And we're also going to be talking about motivation and innovation. But let's start off with something nice and easy. You've just had lunch, and the lunches here are very, very good. I know of which I speak. I go to lots of conferences around the world. The food here is good. It tends to not put you into some kind of pre-diabetic coma after lunch, but even so, I am aware that some of you might be operating with a bit of low energy, so we'll start with some fun, light things. Let's start with some pure programming fun. I would imagine that most of you here are developers, so I thought a few things to tickle you, to get you thinking outside the box. And some of my best examples of fun code come from the Obfuscated C contest, which has been going for a number of years. There is also a Perl version of this competition, but I didn't understand it. And the whole point of this competition is to create code that seems to be you can't understand it, you don't necessarily know what's going on, but you can do amazing things. I've seen entire wikis implemented in 6 lines of C code, which appears to be entirely punctuation. This is one of my favorite entries in the Obfuscated C program contest. Now, this is a working program with correct indentation. This program compiles, and it calculates a number. Can anyone tell me what number it calculates? No, it doesn't calculate pi, it calculates E. Because of course it calculates E, which, again, this sort of thing tickles you. We have some other fun things, not just fun programs that we might write, but also fun programming languages. We have the language which I'll now refer to as BrainF for obvious reasons. You can probably guess what the 2 asterisks mean. This is an entire language which is implemented in terms of, I think it has 2 pointers and 8 commands. The syntax is interesting. So this is a BrainF program. This is actually an implementation of Hello World. It might be a bit hard for you to understand it, so let me try making it bigger, which I think makes it much more clear as to what this program is. Now, on the face of it, this seems like a silly exercise, but part of this is about understanding the nature of how programming languages are created. Any of you who've ever created your own Lisp, for example, would have gone through a similar exercise. There are lots of fun variations on BrainF. We have Ook, which is a version of BrainF, which is done entirely in what we all know as orangutan words. So here again is Hello World. I'll read it out to you. Ook, 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 ook. So I like this. It has a musical quality, and of course it's very silly. And we also have another variation on BrainF star, which is called Whitespace. And the Whitespace programming language is implemented entirely in Whitespace. I'm a Python programmer. I've always felt that meaningful white space is actually a good idea. This might be taking it too far, but I felt like I should share with you an example of a white space programming language. So here's Hello World. This is an e-commerce system. And this one is a solution to the halting problem. So as you can see, it's really innovative stuff. And of course, at this point, we're starting to think, well, there is this sort of very thin line between clever and stupid. And so maybe there were some original ideas, but some of this is just about fun. We have some skills, we take somebody else's idea, and we push at what we can do, and we gain enjoyment from it. Now, at this point, I will say there's an excellent talk by Kevin Helly if you want to go deeper into some of these fun coding examples. But I'm trying to look at the context of fun and play in the context of the workplace a little bit. So maybe let's get just a little bit more serious. And we can start with something like katas. When I first delivered this talk, I was actually, when I was in Croatia, we were there at the same time as a Croatian karate competition was going on. So this was quite apt. A kata is a concept that comes from martial arts, and it is about individual repetition to help you learn a new skill. You might be going through forms. Yoga has similar things as well. And we've taken this idea of individual repetition into solving problems in programming languages to help us understand how to solve problems and how to use that programming language. The original code kata site is still excellent. I think it's from Pragmatic Dave. And this gives you a load of sort of real-world-ish examples that you can use to challenge yourself. You can pick up a new programming language or one you've just started using, and in a couple of hours, do something that's a little bit like the kind of problems you might solve at home, at work, but in a fun, maybe a more fun environment. There's loads of great examples here. We have other variations on this. We have things like programming cones. These are a little bit more po-faced, maybe, than the code katas. These are solving things like Fibonacci sequence calculations, but have the added benefit of often coming with test harnesses. So you want to learn some new programming language. You think, oh, this is the year I finally work out how to code in Perl. You can sit down with these things and delight in your ability to now work out the Fibonacci sequence in Perl. I actually learned Clojure in this way, and it was kind of somewhat rewarding. If you really want to go in at the deep end, of course, we have learned 7 languages in 7 weeks for those of you that have absolutely no life outside of work, but it is doable. So coming back to that idea of safe, experimentation, enjoyable, is it all these things? Well, is it safe? Well, of course this is not safe, right? If we make a mistake when we're programming in a code kata or something else, it's fine. We're getting to experiment. We've created an environment in which we can try new things. That's great. Is it enjoyable? That then led me to the other question I had for myself, which is why wasn't I enjoying things at the beginning of the year as much as I maybe have in the past? So I've been aware of this book for a while. This is a book by Dan Pink called Drive, is looking at the concept of motivation, trying to understand what is it that motivates us. And again, I'm looking here at motivation primarily in the context of work, although maybe there are things you can learn from this that might appeal to you outside of work. And one of the things that I think caused Dan to write this book was learning something new himself. So, here's a question for you. This is the question that Dan Pink struggled with as well. if you pay more, do you get better results? Put your hands up if you think paying more gives better results. Right. So here's the thing, right? You've got about 5 hands going up. So what's happened here is you know that the obvious answer is going to be wrong, otherwise I wouldn't put it up on the screen. So only 5 of you were brave enough to put your hands up to say, yes, I think paying more. Now, if I told you your boss was in the audience, I suspect more of you may have put your hands up at this point, right? And the thing is, those 5 of you who put your hands up were right. It turns out, through studies that have been done, in fact, rewards do actually improve the performance of tasks. So you were right, those 5 people. Kinda. Because it turns out that increasing rewards only improves performance of tasks which are almost entirely mechanical. Tasks which do not require too much in the way of thought or creativity. So the original study that helped popularize or share this kind of learning was a study done by MIT in the US. And it was actually studied by, I think it was the Federal Bank, right? So a very conservative organization. And they got a bunch of economists together to design a study to understand how rewards influence motivation and performance. And they got a bunch of students together, and they set them tasks, and depending on how much money they were given, they were looking at performance, and they found the people that were paid the most performed the least well for anything other than a mechanical task. Right? If you're just being asked to empty a hole, dig a hole, or fill a hole back up, you're not really being asked to use any sort of creativity or thought. It's a purely mechanical thing. Actually, in those environments, paying people more money does actually improve the outcome. But the moment it requires a little bit of thought, this no longer applies. Now, of course, at this point, people are thinking, well, the issue is we've got all these rich MIT students, and we're giving them like $50 here and there to reward them. So clearly that's the issue. The money isn't enough. And so they reproduced that study. They took it, I think the second study they did was actually in India, where they increased the rewards relative to the normal amounts of money people would get. So you would have people on a low, so the low reward would be 2 weeks' salary. A medium reward, you'd get a month's salary. And the highest rewarded people, they would be given 2 months' salary. And again, they found the same thing. The people who were given 2 months' salary performed the worst. This has been found again and again and again and again all over the world in a variety of different studies. If even basic cognitive skills are involved, increasing the amount that you pay somebody actually has a negative impact on the results you get. I am not necessarily suggesting you share this again with your boss come pay review time, but it is something that then sparks a degree of interest, and this is partly what caused Dan to write the book. This isn't to mean that money doesn't matter, but how money impacts us is quite interesting. We need to be paid enough for money to not be an issue. If you're not being paid enough for you to be able to afford to travel to work, or have a safe place to live, or be able to care for your family, or to be able to eat healthily, then absolutely increasing money is going to have an impact. But once you get to a base level of reward, additional money over and above that no longer motivates the majority of people. So what does? And this is kind of the big idea in the book, is separating the concepts of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. So with extrinsic motivation, these are the things that come from the outside. And an awful lot of theories around motivation within the workplace have focused primarily on extrinsic motivation. The things that we do to you as an employee, or the things that we can give you as an employee. But what we've found is that actually intrinsic motivation, the things that come from within, are significantly more important in terms of motivating us. So with extrinsic motivation, we think of reward, promotion, and maybe even punishment. These are the kinds of extrinsic rewards that we might expect. Those intrinsic rewards, though, are the ones that Dan identified quite famously in the book. He distilled them down to autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So here's the 3-pillar intrinsic model of motivation. So autonomy is meaning having control over how the work is done. The more autonomy we have, the more motivated we will become. Mastery is giving us the opportunity to improve our skills. As a developer, that might mean I get the ability to learn new programming languages or learn a cool new piece of technology. And purpose is understanding that the work we are doing matters. And that if we focus on the reward side of things but ignore all of this, we should not be surprised to find that our employees are not motivated and therefore we're not getting a lot out of them. And they are probably not getting a lot out of being in that particular environment. So coming back to the katas then, and sort of viewing something like a code kata through the lens of this understanding of intrinsic motivation, and we start to understand why people like doing them. They speak very much to our ability to master our skills. And I've worked with a lot of people who are in maybe working situations where, because of the nature of the company or the organization, they aren't able to learn new things. So creating space where they can motivate, can make them feel, I've achieved something today. Yes, I've done something really important for the company, but I've also done something important for me. Now, of course, by their nature, at least in terms of the original definition, a kata is a solitary exercise. But I think the vast majority of us here are people who are involved intimately in the creation of software. And software is fundamentally a socio-technical system. This is a very long word, right? Let's break it down. It's very simple. Socio, people, technology, technology. Actually means techne from the Greek. This sounds like a kind of some sort of woke left-wing term. It actually comes from work done by the Tavistock Institute during World War II, who were studying coal mining. And as the world was changing, we started to realize that human beings were interacting with complex technology, and understanding how those systems worked was really, really important. This is the same Tavistock Institute, by the way, that are alleged to be behind the creation of the Beatles as an effort to undermine Western democracy. This is one of the most interesting conspiracy theories that you can still find floating around the internet. But nonetheless, the concept of the socio-technical system is very much real. It's about understanding how people and technology work together. It's something I've actually been doing a lot of work on at the moment because I'm writing a new book. I'll come to that a bit later on. So let's think again about people and technology working together, people, plural, working together. Let's think about people that seem to be motivated by things which have got nothing to do with money, and let's think about open source development. So, do you think it makes sense? Right? People will work with other people they may or may not have met and get paid no money to create software that other companies would then use to make money? On the face of it, it seems nuts. And yet we have an awful lot of people who quite happily get involved with the creation of open source software. And if we view the world purely through that extrinsic motivational lens, it looks bizarre. When we start thinking about motivation in an intrinsic sense, it makes perfect sense. With open source development, do we have autonomy? Absolutely we do. We decide what to do, how to do it. We self-organize. Is it about mastery? Absolutely. An awful lot of people start open source projects to learn new skills that they couldn't learn elsewhere. Do we have purpose? The creation of the software itself, solving problems in a domain where you want to solve those problems, gives us this purpose. So when we start looking through open source software development through the intrinsic motivational lens, it is no surprise that so much of this happens. And for a lot of people, this is where they get their joy. They might work in an environment that pays them enough to pay the bills, but outside of work, they find the ability to get that joy in their lives through open source software development. And honestly, if they didn't get that joy, or if you didn't get that joy, we would all be screwed right now. So when I first discovered this model, it must be about 10 years ago now, it spoke to me, it made sense. But over time, I like to learn things. You speak to people, you listen to people, you start to realize there is still something here missing. This sort of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, the things that come from within. This, we are starting to be told via the new orthodoxy, is motivation. This is what makes us happy and engaged and motivated to get things done. Of course, there's a big piece missing here. Would you feel motivated if you didn't think you belonged? If you're in an environment where you didn't feel valued, where you didn't feel safe, would any of those things really matter to you? And the answer is no, they wouldn't. So this idea of belonging feels like it's been missed again from this kind of model. And to be fair to Dan Pink, he has subsequently gone on to talk about the importance of things like psychological safety. Would you want to play or enjoy yourself or have fun if you didn't feel welcomed? And that's why I kind of tend to talk more about there being 4 pillars almost for motivation, at least in my own management consultancy headcanon. Kind of interesting thing, of course, is that there are still things that you can do in a work setting to create the environment in which case these things can survive. If you want to create a sense of feeling of longing, you need to operate in a place where being wrong is okay, where you can constantly learn, where you have a diversity of talent and experience, where you have an inclusive environment where people feel welcomed. I mean, I can also point to the studies that show that doing all of these things leads to better returns as well, if you want to put your capitalist hat on. But I'll leave that to yourselves to go and get those copies of the Harvard Business Review. So the kata thing, it's solitary, it's scratching some of these itches, but we can kind of do better. I actually quite often run architectural katas. This is, and I actually, for some of the people who came to my workshop, we did a very small example of this. And this is an architectural kata is sort of, again, a sense of group play, a group, hopefully fun. The issue with architecture is you might only be involved in building and designing an architecture like 2 or 3 times in your life. These are systems that take many, many years to build. So really learning and mastering the concept of architecture is very difficult to achieve. So the idea of the architectural kata is that we come up with a fake architecture for a problem that's set to us to allow us to iterate. But fundamentally, these things are always done as group activities. There's a great website by Ted Newman with loads of great architectural katas you can go and run with your team. So now you can get people together and say, we're going to take the afternoon and we're going to come up with an architecture for, well, what I did recently, I created a kata recently for a fish farm, right, in the Outer Hebrides. It's a weird space, right? We get to talk about fish a lot, right? It's about kind of working together. And if you can find opportunities to have an area for fun and play and experimentation, which at the same time engenders a sense of teamwork and belonging, that can be incredibly valuable. I will just say a kind of a note of caution here, which is if you do already have dysfunctions within your organization, just throwing in some group exercises isn't going to magically make people who don't feel like they're welcomed suddenly welcomed. In fact, they can often just magnify those experiences, so some kind of facilitation is kind of useful. And look, in their own kind of clumsy way, this is what a lot of those team-building exercises are about, aren't they? Let's go go-karting. Why? Well, actually, it turns out the boss really wants to go go-karting, but the idea here is that we get people chatting, we get people bonding, but they always feel a little bit tokenistic. So looking for opportunities that maybe tick some of those other motivational boxes at the same time as creating a sense of belonging, you're likely to get more value out of those exercises. Now, speaking of creating value out of those exercises, let's talk about Google. Now, when we think about fun and experimentation, Google did something quite interesting. Who here has heard of 20% time? A lot of you, right? And whenever a big company does something, especially when that company becomes very successful, the things they do take on an air of mystery. They become almost the thing that defines what that company does and maybe must be the secrets of their success. And 20% time is one of those examples. So for those of you who don't know, this is the notion that if you work at Google, you get 20% of your time off from work to do whatever you feel like. I actually got to work at Google for 1.5 years, and it was really interesting. It was back in 2007. Thinking back to my own internal intrinsic motivations, autonomy, mastery, purpose, I had all of those things for me while I was at Google. I had a boss that got out of my way and let me do what I wanted. Tick in the autonomy box. Mastery, I learned loads of cool stuff. Tick in the mastery. And purpose. Do you know back then, Google had 2 very simple purposes that anybody in the organization could have told you. Help organize the world's information and don't be evil. It's interesting when they stopped talking about not being evil. When you go out of your way to no longer say don't be evil, isn't that sending some interesting signals? And now, coming back to this concept of the purpose in that 3-pillar, motivational exercise, if an organization is telling you about its purpose and you buy into it, and then its very actions go against that purpose, you start to not believe any longer in the purpose of the organization. So if you're in charge of a company, maybe you've got a startup and you want to give people a purpose. Steve Jobs says, I wanted to put a ding in the universe, which is a very self-centered view of the world, but at least it's something you kind of believe he might have believed in, right? But when your organization makes tokenistic statements about what it's going to do and then doesn't deliver on them, that makes you feel bad inside, doesn't it? I would say at least it was honest of Google to no longer say, don't be evil. But there we are. But let's come back to the concept of 20% time. So this is the idea that 20% of your time, you can do whatever you want. And we were told about how amazing this was for Google in terms of helping them make more money. That's primarily what they talked about, right? They talked about, this is how we developed the ads business. And that's kind of true. There was an engineer who worked out that they could use ads that were currently at that point only surfaced on Google's own search site to put them onto Gmail. Using contextual information in Gmail, they could put ads into the Gmail application. And their boss said, no, that's not a good idea. And they did it anyway on their 20% time. And that basically was amazingly successful for them and unlocked the whole business for Google of putting ads on other people's websites. And people inside Google will talk to you endlessly about how much money that idea made. It's also a bit of a lie. Right, that one story is true, but the benefits of 20% time more broadly than that? Well, let's talk about the reality. So when I first got there, I would go and speak to my colleagues, and I'd say, so do you have 20% time? And they say, yeah. We have 20% time. It's called the weekend. Turns out, if your boss didn't want you to have 20% time, you didn't have 20% time. If you had a deadline, you didn't have 20% time. The only people that seemed to always get 20% time were those engineers that had been there a very, very long period of time, that had a lot of power internally and could do what they wanted. Those new people that joined, especially the interns, would do every single thing they could to be seen like company people. And they would not do their 20% time because they were too scared about being moved into a really bad team. Even when 20% time kind of worked, when I saw it being used, it was primarily, again, about individual-focused activity, playtime. Some people would just do whatever they felt like. Some people might work together, but most of it was solitary exercises. And look, in a lot of cases, some people just used it to take the day off. I think a better version of this concept actually comes from Atlassian. So Atlassian have the concept of a ship it day, and on the face of it, it seems to be quite similar, but also not as generous. So every quarter, I think the cadence has changed over time. People get to work on whatever they want to work on for either a day or 2 days. And some very interesting and stark differences for what Atlassian does versus what the 20% time is. Firstly, there is some just light guidance, right? They say, look, we're going to stop it after a day because you need to have showers and stuff like that, right? They give you some ideas about things that you could do, right? But it's also really open. If you want to come in and work on your homebrew, you can do that. If you want to learn how to be a barista, you and some friends can go and learn how to be a barista. Some of you want to fix bugs, you can go fix bugs. It's really open. But they do a couple of clever things with it. They only really ask you to do one thing. There's only one thing they want in return. And that is, they want you to share what you did. That's it. But the clever things they do, aside from being fairly unstructured, giving you that sense of autonomy, allowing you to find your own way, is it happens at the same time for everybody. Everybody does the Ship It Day at the same time. This increases the chance that you're going to be able to do things with your colleagues. It also makes it a much bigger deal if they decide for it not to happen. It's not down to what one individual manager wants anymore. There will be a Ship It Day. We will all do it at the same time. It's about making sure it happens, creating opportunities for working with your colleagues and everything else. And I think it's a great example of this sort of thing. It can help create that sense of belonging because you can bring your hobbies into work if you want to. Bringing your whole selves to work. It's a horrible phrase. I hate it. But it's also, there's some truth to it. Allowing you to learn new things. It's maybe not very purpose-driven, but you can't have everything. Let's think of something that might, on the face of it, appear now to be a little bit less fun. But it is still arguably about self-experimentation. Let's think about game days. So game days, in their variety of different guises, are exercises to simulate bad things happening primarily, and to understand how you react in those scenarios and help you build new skills and new processes and new procedures to deal with these terrible things should they ever happen. It's all about creating safe places to fail. If you've never seen a game day exercise, I can thoroughly recommend this episode of Parks and Rec, which, when they simulate, I think it was a zombie apocalypse or something like that, right? And these can be very useful. We don't want to discover we're unprepared for zombie apocalypse on the day of the zombie apocalypse. So having the ability to kind of role play these things in the lead up to it can be very, very useful. So a friend of mine, Russ Miles, wrote a book called Learning Chaos Engineering a few years ago, and he shares a story that came from effectively a game day exercise he was running. So in this particular organization where he was consulting, there was a Bob. Okay, a Bob, just called Bob. We all met people like a Bob. Bob knows how everything works. Often quite a quiet person, just sits in the corner and has all the answers. People come and go, Bob remains. And so Bob was concerned that I know a lot and other people rely on me a lot, and the boss of the company was also worried that we have an awful lot of risk associated with the fact that we personally effectively have a key individual that knows too much. And at this point, you always start getting worried about, what happens if Bob gets hit by a bus? Or, less disturbingly, maybe they just get a better offer and leave the company, or they retire, or something else like this. And so they wanted to understand how big a problem that would be. And so Ross basically facilitated a failure. So people arrived at work, and they said, okay, so today we are simulating a production failure. Production is down. We've got the QA environment over here set up as though it's production, but there's something wrong with it. And you've got to fix it. And they all said, where's Bob? And Russ said, I think, Bob's dead. Now, in reality, Bob was elsewhere in the building, just observing what was going on. But they said, for the purposes of this exercise, Bob's dead, you're very sad, get over it quickly, you've got a production system to get back up and running. So they then start scurrying around, and they don't know what to do, and they're going, and they start trying to do things. And Bob is actually on the terminal watching what's happening in the logs, seeing what's going on. And then he has to rush into the room when he realizes that they've accidentally logged into production, and they're about to drop the production database. So the realms of safe play probably got a bit blurred there. But it was a great learning experience, right? Because in that moment, you could then, in the debrief, you can go through what did we not know. Now when we need to talk to Bob, we need to mine that information out. We've got somewhere to start. And also, it's a good teachable moment, because you can be told this person knows too much, we need to do skills transfer. But when you've got a real kind of concrete example of how serious that is, that can be really valuable. I think a lot of people dread things like game days. I think they're fun. you can try things out. Google have actually done a very good job of sharing a lot of the information they do around their own game day exercises, where they'll do everything from real and simulated experiences. I mean, I was there when they did a real sort of game day, where they told people a month in advance they were turning off one of their data centers. Right, that's kind of the real end. But they often do much less structured things than that. So this is a great post from one of the cloud engineers talking about how they'd go into a team and they would spin the wheel of misfortune. So we're coming in today and we're going to simulate a failure on your system. And today, what's happening? You've lost 90% of your network bandwidth. Let's talk about what's going to happen and how you're going to solve it. I love the idea of the wheel of misfortune because it does feel fun. I really hope there's somebody walking around Mountain View with a giant spinny wheel, but I'm going to guess it's probably a random number generator in a Google Sheet or something like that. But this is about fun play. This is about experimentation. This is about trying new things and learning new things. So we've got some of these sort of examples of play and experimentation. Some of them can be quite directed. Things like the game day exercises, for example, are very much driven based on the company needs certain things. We've got to worry about disaster recovery or BCP or whatever it might be. And so we're going to try and create some more fun ways of exploring and improving our ability to perform in this space. But at the other end of the spectrum, we kind of have these examples of fun and play which are very much undirected. We start thinking about game days or architectural katas all the way to ship it days and 20% time. And so if we think again about those motivational forces, the more unguided or undirected these things are, the more they speak to our ability to have a degree of autonomy. This can sometimes be a double-edged sword. If you're sort of doing these activities in and amongst your normal day job, and in your normal day job you are micromanaged to within an inch of your lives, and then they create every moment, maybe every quarter, one shining moment where you get to think for yourself. There is a danger that all it can do is bring into stark relief how horrible your normal day job is. So you have to be careful here, right? Don't spook the horses too quickly. There's also a danger, though, that people can take these experimentations and make them too much about the company and what the company wants to achieve. Once you start seeing 20% time or things like it through the lens of this is how we will make more money, they start to lose their magic, they start to lose their value. And this is something also I came up again and again. Speaking of fun and play, and somebody having a bit of a laugh, I used to work at a company called ThoughtWorks, and somebody at ThoughtWorks, in their infinite wisdom, thought it would be a good old funny jape to make me the global head of innovation. Somebody with the attention span of a mayfly should be in charge of innovation for a 2,000-person global organization. Let's just say it didn't end terribly well for anyone involved, but nobody died. But during this tenure of learning about how I was bad at being a head of innovation, I did spend a lot of time looking into what do organizations do to be innovative. And a lot of what I was originally being told was, oh, we need to do 20% time. We need to give people money to reward innovation. None of those things actually work. If you really want to create an innovative organization, to create new product offerings, it actually starts with creating the right culture in which you operate. You need that fertile soil for these things to be done. You need to create an environment where it's okay to be wrong, where you celebrate both success and failure equally, where you create a space where people can constantly learn, where you feel inclusive, where you have a diversity of talent and experience. If you're doing these things as an organization, you create that fertile soil in which that intrinsic motivation can really come to the fore. And against that backdrop, maybe if you do things like ship it days or 20% time, you might discover some amazing new products. But if you just come into it thinking, we're just going to do some one-off, once-a-year transactional activity, we're going to do a FedEx day where we have to ship something in 48 hours, and we do it once a year, and you do nothing else, then that little token effort will be seen for what it is. You'll be sowing that seed on very stony ground. And people will see through it. So if you're struggling with your own motivation or the motivation of your colleagues, think about that extrinsic versus the intrinsic. Don't confuse them. Also, I wouldn't want you to think that it's only about the goal. Fun and play for the sake of it can be absolutely fine. Coming to work and feeling this is a nice place, we can go and have a laugh, I think that's absolutely fine as well. But maybe if you're going through your own funk, think back to those 4 pillars of motivation and maybe think, is there some kind of fun or play that I can find for myself that might scratch those personal itches that I've got? I'm still working on mine. I think back, I work by myself, right? So it's odd for me to be talking about socio-technical systems to an extent. I think back to the autonomy, mastery, purpose, and belonging, and I think, well, I belong because I'm the only person in my company, apart from my wife, and she belongs more than I do. Do I have autonomy? I have too much autonomy, right? This is the problem. I actually deal well with deadlines. I like being told I've got to do things. So for me, that's been a bit of a struggle because I've had more autonomy this year than I normally would, and that's led me into a bit of a spiral. I'm still not entirely sure. I mean, I get mastery. I love writing. I get to get better as a writer. I get to speak. That's stretching my skills. I get to work with people. Purpose? I'm still working on purpose. Still working on purpose. Maybe we all are. Whatever you're doing, try and have a bit of fun. Think about your own motivators. Think about those times when you've had a good time at work, when you've had a not good time at work. Don't chase the dollar unless you need the dollar. Well, krona. But you get the idea. So, fun, play, experimentation, there's a space for all of that in our work. And maybe focusing on that rather than measuring performance, I think is probably a smarter way forward for all of us. Talk after this, I think Damien's doing a talk about the importance of developer happiness. And that might be an interesting thread to continue with after this talk. I've kept you for enough time. It's a lovely day. I wasn't here last year because I had COVID, so I had to present remotely. And I've got to be honest, the weather was awful last year. But today, the weather is absolutely glorious. So do take a chance, if you can, to go and get some fresh air and some sunshine. Chat to some new people. Maybe think about what motivates you. Speaking of what motivates me at the moment, primarily, I am finishing off not finishing off, I'm halfway through a new book all about building distributed resilient systems. You can go read about that over at my website. You can get free sort of the first 5 chapters on O'Reilly.com. I'd love to see what you think of it if you get a chance to read it. One of the happiest times of my year was writing a 7,000-word chapter on timeouts. This is a good way for you to understand that we're not all the same, and some people like really weird things. But hopefully I'll get to chat to some of you later in the conference. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And yeah, thank you for your time.